Good evening. I hereby call to order the agenda review session of the Board of School Commissioners for Tuesday, June 23rd. Would everyone please stand and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance?
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, good evening, everyone. It's finally good to be back in this room together, even with our masks and our social distancing. You'll notice all the commissioners are wearing masks tonight. We will ask commissioners to remove their masks when they're speaking. We have 3 commissioners on the phone with us tonight, participating via teleconference pursuant to the governor's extension of the public health emergency and associated with modifications to the open door law. So we will continue to get through this. You'll notice if you're in the room or if there are views of the room available, everyone, including the commissioners, are properly socially distanced. And we will continue to take public comment via our portal until, I think, is it noon on Thursday, Mr. Mulholland? 4 p.m. on Thursday. So at that point, Mr. Mulholland, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Arnold.
Present.
Commissioner Gore.
Gore, are you with us?
Okay, we'll work on that. Commissioner Moore.
Present.
There's Commissioner Gore also.
Commissioner Slack.
Commissioner Slack, are you with us?
Okay, we'll check on those.
This is Commissioner Gore. Did you get me?
Yeah, we did. We did, Commissioner Gore.
Thank you.
Okay. Secretary Collins.
Present.
Vice President Hawkins.
Present.
President O'Connor.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Mulholland. We'll now adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Reviewing the agenda, are there any requests for changes to the agenda as presented? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The agenda is adopted. We will make special recognitions on Thursday. As I articulated earlier, the opening comments are taken via the portal, and they will be published Thursday. To minimize the risk of exposure for members of the public sharing the same microphone at the podium, we are maintaining that portal until, as was earlier stated, 4 p.m. on Thursday. So far, we've received 2 written submissions for Thursday's board meeting. Moving to the consent agenda, reviewing the items listed in the consent agenda. Are there questions about any of these items listed or a request to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing none, moving to board reports. There are no board reports, so I will turn the agenda over to Superintendent Johnson.
Thank you, President O'Connor. There is one superintendent report to be presented this month. Item 6.01 is an update on the district's COVID-19 response planning, specifically as it relates to our reopening of schools for next year. That presentation will be made on Thursday by Andrew Strope, our Chief of Strategy and Planning, and Sarah Robinson-Chin, our Director of Strategy. There are 2 items in unfinished business. Both of these items were presented to the board last month and have now been held for the requisite 30 days. The administration will request the board's approval of them on Thursday. The first item, item 7.01, is the Student Mental and Behavioral Services Records Policy. This policy was created to ensure alignment with Senate Enrolled Act 246, which was passed by the Indiana General Assembly this year and signed into law by Governor Eric Holcomb. It made some changes to the legislation that governs how we maintain and secure student mental health records. Courtney Flukas last month shared with the board an update on how we maintain those records. I will note we are currently already meeting the requirements that are set forth in the policy, so we just need to codify those requirements in board policy. Any questions about that particular policy? Great. We will ask for the board's action on that on Thursday. Item 7.02 is the remote learning policy, which we also talked about last month. As we are preparing for future school years, specifically 2021, we know that there will be instances in which we will be in a remote learning environment, and so this policy is to prepare for that shift. One difference I will point out for this month is we have added language to this policy under the device use section that codifies the fees for lost or damaged technology, which includes hotspots or MiFis, tablets, laptops, that the fees for those will be assessed to families per the Student Technology Acceptable Use Agreement. So that is different than what we presented last month. That addition was made. And we will also ask the board to take action on this policy on Thursday. So happy to address any questions if you have them.
Collins?
I'm just curious to know, are there protections embedded in our security on our laptops that are embedded in the actual security of the laptop?
In terms of what students can access and those kinds of
Yes.
filters? Yes, and then our IT team, as we are ordering more devices, we're looking at what are those securities and gateways we need to make sure we're managing for students. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move us into new business. We have 3 items in new business. Item 8.01 is our textbook rental schedule for the 2021 school year. As a reminder, in Indiana, all school districts are required to provide students with textbooks or curricular materials for students. We, as a school district, are permitted to utilize a rental system to defray the cost of providing those textbooks to our students. Each year, we adopt a rental schedule based on the textbooks and materials that will be used across our schools. If you looked at that schedule, you may have noticed that the fees were a bit higher this year. That is reflective of the fact that we've adopted new ELA materials, so there's an increased cost for that that you would have noticed in that schedule for this year. Happy to take any questions, and also Weston Young is available. Weston, any context you would add? Any questions from the board?
Collins?
I noticed we just saw K through 8, correct? Did I miss another document? What about high school?
Weston? Did you hear the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The list is K-8. The reason why we list only K-8 is because at the high school level, we bill it at the course level. So a student that is a freshman may take a different course load than another freshman versus a senior versus a sophomore. We bill those out individually to the families, but we don't have a standard rate for them across the grade band.
Thank you, Weston.
Thank you. 2 questions. One is about the document. The other one is related to the $30 technology fee. But the first question is, I see Harshman, Longfellow, as well as Northwest Middle School. There are no expenses, at least incurred, or at least projected, for the first 6 years. And then I noticed that in some cases, year 7 and year 8, there are expenses. I know that we had, at least as I understood it, we were the arc or the time horizon was typically 6 years, and so just trying to understand sort of why there are blanked out rows, and then year 7 and 8 as well, where expense picks up.
So to clarify, the columns are the grade level. So 7 and 8 is not the year, it's the grade level. So Harshman being a 7-8, it would have that.
Thanks for clarifying that. I was thinking those were years going forward. Okay, thanks for clarifying that. I appreciate it. Then the second question is about the $30 technology fee. Can you kind of unpack a little bit about what that means? I know we talked about in the device use policy the replacement fee, but what does that $30 do or mean?
For you, yes. So with the adoption of one-to-one technology, there is an opportunity within IDOE curricular material guidelines that allows us to charge a technology fee. So this fee associates the repair, maintenance, the logistics, the support roles that it takes to conduct and support the one-to-one technology initiative. If we wanted to, we would have the ability to take 25% of the cost of the device and charge that out. this $30 is about it's a fraction of that amount. So what we probably could do is on an Apple purchase of $400, we could actually be billing for $100 for a technology fee. In this case, we've talked to a couple other neighboring districts who are very similar in the demographics and also have one-to-one, and this is in line with the dollar amount that they have in their textbook rental rate.
Thank you. Is the technology fee, this is maybe a history question, is this new for?
It is new because one-to-one is new.
Okay.
So if you're not one-to-one
Yeah.
as a curricular, this is why we have the learning policy in place. That's the add in the remote learning policy. So we have to set board policy for fees and collection of fees. So we've done that in the policy, and then we've added it to the rate. So it is new because one-to-one technology initiative is new for IPS.
Okay, that's helpful. I didn't know if in the past, if there was
There had not
because of
been.
the
There had
computer
not been.
labs and et cetera, if there was additional fees for that. So that's good to know. Thank you.
We couldn't tie it to a specific student because we were not one-to-one.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have had a request from our commissioners on the phone that if we can speak clearly into the mic so they can hear.
Okay, we'll move to item 8.02, and I made a mistake. We have 4 items in new business. So item 8.02 is a non-standard course waiver request for Kinsey Academy at George Washington High School. This waiver will allow the district to create a full-scale Kinsey Academy program of study. And by having this waiver in place, that will allow George Washington High School to open the Kinsey Academy User Experience Design Pathway or program to more students across George Washington, not just within the IT Academy. The User Experience Design Program is a 2-year program that combines art, technology, and design within project-based learning and real-life situations. Students who successfully complete this program will earn a joint certificate in UX design through Butler University Kinsey Academy, as well as 18 dual credits through Western Governors University. Students are then also eligible to continue their post-secondary education through Kinsey Academy and earn the software engineering certification, as well as an additional 18 credits toward bachelor degree programs at Western Governors University. So very excited about what the passage of this waiver will mean in terms of those opportunities for our students. And happy to take any questions. Jennifer O'Shea, our post-secondary readiness officer, is also here, and she can answer any questions as well.
Any questions from board members? Any questions from commissioners on the phone? Commissioner Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, President O'Connor. I mean, this is a great partnership. It's exciting to kind of read through that. And I guess my question is this is exclusive to George Washington High School at this point?
Right now,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. So I noticed that when I was reading through the memo that there is an IPS faculty or staff member or instructor assigned along with a Kinsey Academy individual. Can you talk a little bit about how is that person funded or how is the program supported? Because this is exciting and it'd be great to ensure that students who are in grade 10 can matriculate all the way through and that the support's there. So.
Absolutely. Jennifer, can you come up and address that question?
Yeah, so the Kinsey Academy Partnership is currently funded through both the Walton Family Foundation with direct support to Kinsey Academy, as well as through Bloomberg Philanthropies, which is a grant that we received. Currently, there are 2 instructors. There's one that's provided by Kinsey Academy. She has been fabulous, and she works alongside an instructor over at George Washington, so they sort of co-teach. Although the instructor at George Washington is starting to back out a little bit because the instructor from Kinsey Academy has been so wildly successful.
Commissioner Arnold?
I'm just very supportive because I think this fits right in with our strategy of students being able to be certified and to move out into the employment world, making salaries that will sustain themselves and their families. So very supportive.
Thank you. thanks to Jennifer and her team, they've worked incredibly hard to continue to build out very competitive, relevant opportunities for our students. So we will ask for your approval of that course waiver on Thursday. Item 8.03 is the Racial Equity Mindset Commitment and Action Policy. I am very proud to bring this policy to the board this evening. Approval of a racial equity board policy was one of the milestones that was a part of our 2019-2020 annual plan under our racial equity mindset priority. Given the current climate in our country, I think it is timely that we are bringing this policy to you all this evening. We are going to ask the board to waive the 30-day hold on this policy, and we'll ask for your action on Thursday. And I'd love to have Andrew Strope, our Chief of Strategy and Planning, Shantario Harris, Special Assistant to the Governance Team, and Dr. Patricia Payne, 58-year IPS veteran and Director of our Racial Equity team, to present some additional context and information.
So good evening, Board of School Commissioners. I think this is fine. Sean, we can, if you want to step up there. So the three of us will be kind of co-presenting here. And so to get us rolling, as Superintendent Johnson mentioned, the desired outcome is for you all to review, discuss, and adopt the proposed board policy 1619, which is Racial Equity Mindset, Commitment, and Action. And so through this conversation, we will walk through where we've been, where we are now. We'll get some summary bullet points from the actual board policy, and then talk a little bit about actions and where we're going in the future. So I will turn it over to Dr. Payne.
Oh, thank you very much. Good evening, Board. How are you this evening? And Superintendent, thank you again for allowing me to come before you with our signature slide, the fish, the lake, and the groundwater. The fish, can you understand me all right?
You're welcome to take it off while you're talking.
Okay.
That would be fine and helpful, probably.
All right. The fish, of course, is the metaphor for our Black and Latinx students floating dead and unresponsive in the lake, fueled by all of the negative stereotypes, negative assumptions, which produce low expectations, such as they're lazy, don't want to learn, illegal aliens, and so forth. The lake, that's the metaphor for the contamination, killing the fish, such as redlining, war on drugs, segregation, all fueled by racism. And then there's the groundwater. That holds the racism firmly in place. The systemic and the structural racism that we've been hearing a lot about lately. The racially constructed society that we live in. It is racially constructed. So this can't be explained by socioeconomic differences or by individual culture and behavior. It's caused by systems that hold the racism firmly in place. Where have we been? In 1979, we came before the board, and they passed a resolution, and I have just a little bit of that wording from 1979 I want to share with you. And of course, remember at that time, the student population was Black and white. So it says, whereas the need exists to increase awareness and stimulate thought for the teaching and learning of Black history as an integral part of the total curriculum of the Indianapolis Public Schools, and whereas the attention of educators, students, parents, and the community must be focused on the importance of putting forth a continuous effort to create a learning environment that accurately portrays the rich history of Black America and its impact on shaping and maintaining America's progress and growth. Be it resolved The Board of School Commissioners endorses the practice of teaching Black history in the Indianapolis Public Schools, and further, the board urges that a Black history curriculum be developed and implemented to the extent that it becomes an identifiable part of the Indianapolis Public Schools curriculum in grades kindergarten through 12th. See, at that time, we didn't really know that it takes more than a curriculum for our students to learn. So in 1987, the Office of Multicultural Education, staffed by Anne Marie Byers and Pat Payne, opened. And in 1998, the Crispus Attucks Museum, designed by Gilbert Taylor, opened its doors. In 2015, the Multicultural Office evolved into the Racial Equity Office, and that's where we are now. So our vision is this: an IPS community where student outcomes cannot be predicted by race or ethnicity. There's no way you should know who's going to be at the bottom before the test is even given. Something's very, very wrong there. Our mission is to lead a collaboration of community members who will partner with IPS to improve outcomes for students by eliminating racial disproportionality and disparity. So in partnership with the Racial Equity Institute, we began with 12 schools whose principals volunteered for the 2-day intensive training that analyzed the structure of racism. We now have 29 schools trained, each with their own school equity teams. But our goal that we intend to reach is that all of our schools will become equity schools and go through the training. To date, over 3,000 staff members and some community members have been trained, including all of our board members. So in ending, I'd just like to say that the remarkable leadership of our superintendent, Alicia Johnson, and chief strategist, Andrew Strope, must be recognized with great gratitude. We also want to thank you, board members, for all you have done and hopefully will do to make racial equity in our district a movement and not just a moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Payne. And obviously, Dr. Payne, under your leadership and Anne Marie Byers and many others, this organization has been at this work for quite a while. And so wanted to focus a little bit on this past school year when Superintendent Johnson took the helm. We outlined a 1920 annual plan that had a list of strategic priorities, and one of those was a racial equity mindset. So you see that at the top of the slide that had a related initiative. And then there's a list of, and this list is not exhaustive, but a list of actions that our organization has been taking this past school year. And Dr. Payne, feel, definitely, please, add any, nuance here. So I'll just highlight a few of these, but one of the first things we did this past school year was plan and execute racial equity training through the Racial Equity Institute with all of our new teachers. So we had over 200 new teachers to IPS go through racial equity training as part of their onboarding, and so that was a tremendous step. And we designed and implemented the town halls that you all led and took part of, and spent 45 minutes to an hour watching the very impactful video from the Crispus Attucks documentary and having very direct conversations about race in this city. And then what I've underlined there, the publisher adopt a district-wide vision and board policy for racial equity, so that this is something that we've been at really for about a year, and I've had a couple conversations with you all, and as Sean will outline, many conversations with community members and principals and teachers and many others to get to the point we are at today. So we have been at this for a little while. And some additional notes in terms of, I think these are really big items when we talk about kind of aligning our systems behind this policy. we have been able to execute monthly racial equity conversations with our principals led by Dr. Payne, and that is based on a case study analysis method. And for educators, that the monthly principal meetings, that is prime real estate in terms of getting in front of them, and they are very, very busy professionals, and so they have welcomed that with open arms, and the expectation is that they take those conversations into their buildings with their staffs. We've had targeted training for discipline staffs. Our deans, culture climate specialists have also been going through racial equity training. That has been new this year. And then some performance management alignment. We presented to the board last fall around a restructuring of our central service and school leadership evaluations. And so the very first indicator that all of our school leadership teams, as well as us at central office, are evaluated against is lead from an equity imperative and embrace the diversity of the IPS community. And there are a number of indicators within that. And then we've also restructured our school goals. And so this was the first year that our schools had specific equity metrics around ELA growth, math growth, special education, disproportionality, and suspension. So all of that data was disaggregated. And of course, we didn't get a chance to finish the school year as it related to some of those items, but we had that in place, and we'll look to build that as we head into next school year. So now I'll turn it over to Sean to talk specifically about the policy.
Thanks, Andrew. Good evening, board. So the purpose of this racial equity policy is that it codifies exactly where IPS stands, and that we have the desire that we want to create an IPS community in which student outcomes cannot be predicted by race and ethnicity. The policy also formally acknowledges the history of racism and legalized segregation in the city of Indianapolis, as well as the board's history of actively participating in maintaining systems of inequity towards communities of color, as well as students of color, and a commitment to identifying and addressing all policies and practices that perpetuate institutionalized racism, as well as the opportunity gap within the district. So the policy is divided into 6 specific sections. I wanted to highlight racial equity and definitions. We found that it was important to not only give racial equity its own section, as well as provide a robust list of definitions, because anyone who reads this document will be grounded and know exactly what we're speaking of when we talk about racial equity, and that all the terminologies included in this policy is aligned to the racial equity training that everyone is going through in the district. And then also with the commitments and actions, this policy is simply not just words on paper. We're gonna take immediate action to actually address this. We don't want this to be seen as a trend. This is something that we're extremely serious about. And also, this is not a brand new conversation for the board. We started this work around this time last year and revisited this past January at the winter retreat. The Racial Equity Strategy Working Group has seen this policy and played a huge role in developing it. And we engaged several stakeholder groups. Over the last 2 weeks, we had principals, students, teachers, Innovation Network, school leaders, and board members, as well as the Superintendent's Parent and Community Advisory Council, take a look at this policy and give their feedback. And the policy that is presented today is a culmination of all that feedback.
Great, thank you, Sean. And definitely, before we move on, I would acknowledge Sean's leadership in really as the principal author of the policy. And we have been at this for about a year, but when it came time to really get this organized and push it over the finish line, Sean was a major part of that. So Sean, thank you. So as we think about where we're going, you're getting a sneak peek here into our strategic planning in 2025. So as you very well know, right when COVID hit, we were right in the middle of strategic planning for the next 5 years. And so we have been organizing over the past number of months, but in particular the past couple of months, some specific action items as it relates to where we think we want to go for next school year and beyond. And so we will have a priority around racial equity as we head into the next 5 years. And so I've identified that there. So strengthen and expand our racial equity work to eliminate opportunity gaps, align policies and talent decisions to IPS equity agenda, and build the capacity for team members to persistently interrupt and address institutional bias. And then we've got a list of milestones or actions that we are committing to that are aligned to the policy that we've already started working on some of those, and others we will get working on here in the very near future. So just to name a few of those, we've been launching affinity groups. So an example of that is a confronting white privilege group, which myself and a number of other individuals across the organization are meeting regularly to have conversations. Recognize Juneteenth as a district holiday. Establish a task force to review names of all schools, facilities, and venues to ensure that the individuals so honored reflect respect for the dignity and quality of the students that we serve. A big one here is establish a partnership with Promise 54, which is an organization that supports many school districts and organizations across the country with diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so they will be coming in very soon to do a diversity, equity, inclusion audit, and then a review of our internal processes. So as we talk about a policy and we espouse certain values, we also need to have some baseline information to see how we actually operate, not just in schools, but also centrally, if that actually aligns to what we're saying we believe in. And so our plan is to get that started right on the heels of this policy. So we're excited for that work. And then publish and integrate into all progress monitoring systems a racial equity scorecard that is aligned to the adopted policy. As I mentioned, we did some work last year with ensuring that we were disaggregating data and really looking at student outcomes and things like not only academic outcomes, but discipline and others, disaggregated and looking at those across our system. And as we outline a new strategic plan, we're going to make sure that we are doing that work even more intentionally and with a commitment to bring that information to the public and to the board for review, which is part of the policy. And then expand our racial equity trainings to ensure that all school and central office staff members attend racial equity training by the end of school year 21-22. So as Dr. Payne mentioned, we've started that work over the past 5 years. We've had pilot racial equity schools. 29 schools have signed up essentially to go through that. We've trained over 3,000 staff members. The reality is that we're using that work as a foundation for this policy. We need to get everybody trained and actually make that commitment. And so we will scale that work up. We've already started those conversations, and hopefully we'll start doing that next month, where we're going to be doing those trainings virtually. And then a few additional ones: determine system structures that need to be in place to support schools with racial equity initiatives in their buildings, both for staff and students. So Dr. Payne and I have shared before with the board kind of how we have been structured around school equity teams. So those 29 pilot schools have specific structures in place where they're pushing conversations within their buildings. But as we expand this to all schools, we'll want to make sure that we are supporting all schools, and not only what is expected from a school equity team perspective, but then how to all hold each other accountable for that. And then design and launch programming to support school improvement with a particular focus on prioritizing people, time, and money to support the improvement of IPS's highest need schools. So there are a number of actions underneath that. That's a pretty large milestone as it relates to supporting our schools that had the most need. And so that's one we are looking to be very intentional with as well. So that is all we had for you, and we're happy to take any questions.
I would suggest we start with any commissioners on the phone, if they have any questions for Andrew or Dr. Payne or Sean this evening.
No, not as Commissioner Moore.
I heard Commissioner Gore say no, and I heard Commissioner Moore say something. Was that also no?
No, this is Commissioner Moore. I don't have a question, but I would like to make a statement, please. I want to say that I want to commend our superintendent for stepping up with this policy earlier on, before any of these things happened that opened up the eyes of our country and our nation. She was talking about providing equity throughout our schools, throughout our school district, and that took a lot of courage. And I respect the things that she and Dr. Payne and others have done, and I want to salute her for all the things that she continues to do for IPS.
Thank you.
President,
Yes, Commissioner Gore.
okay. I would like to chime in as well. I just didn't have any questions, but I did want to make a statement that I, too, appreciate the leadership of our superintendent
and I appreciate the leadership and the dedication of Dr. Payne. And now that she has and has always had a great staff working with her, through it all, she has stuck with racial equity. And now it's really becoming something that not only here in Indianapolis, but the country is looking at. So kudos to IPS in their leadership and in working with Dr. Payne. Thank you.
Any other commissioners have questions, comments? Commissioner Hawkins?
Thank you, President O'Connor. Dr. Payne, you said, I've heard you say this before, a movement, that this is a moment and not a movement.
This is a movement.
Oh, hold
and
up,
not
See, I'm a little rusty. I've been up on this deck for a while. Yeah, that this is about a movement, right? Not just this moment, even though this moment is significant and meaningful. So I don't want to lose the moment in this week and what it means for our community. But I just love everything about this policy. I mean, the mindset, commitment, and action, right? That to me is the moment and the movement in action.
Yes.
You know, so I just want to thank you and thank Andrew and Sean and Superintendent Johnson for
Yes.
your efforts and your teams thus far. This takes a whole lot of work. We're seeing a bit of a tip of the iceberg, but it takes a whole lot of energy and movement to make this happen. And so, and then you snuck up to 1619 on the number. I love it.
Yeah.
That's incredible. You know, I mean, that amazing.
Went up there.
So,
Yeah.
you know, I just want to just lift that up and thank everyone for your efforts. And I'm especially, you know, I think on the slide 11 where we, you know, the second bullet where it talks about under milestones, I love the milestone piece because again, this moment is critical, but it's about the movement and the action going forward and what that means. And so, you know, we talk about people, time, and money. That's it. That's what we do and how we operate. And so I just wanted to appreciate that being flagged. And again, I just can't stress how excited I am about this moment and the movement that we will, and the journey, I'm sorry, that we will take together. So thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Arnold?
I just want to add my appreciation and thanks for all the work that's gone into it. And I'm so glad that the presentation is framed in the history and where we are now and where we are moving toward, because, you know, many of us know that the IPS district was entrenched in systemic racism for many, many years. And our children have been harmed, and we've made a lot of progress, but I'm so optimistic with moving forward with this that we're going to get to a place that we really need to be for our students. But I think it is important as we're looking at all the things that are going on in our country today, looking at the history of how people have been treated and discriminated against. It's so important for people like me that never had those challenges in my life to be able to understand and appreciate and need to learn more so that I can do a better job of addressing my own personal biases. So thank you very much.
You.
Commissioner Collins?
Last and least. No, I want to thank, I'm glad we're doing this. And I thank you all for dedicating your time and your critical thinking to creating a document that makes sense, is timely, and I'm 100% behind it.
I would just add a couple of things going through the presentation that Dr. Payne, who has meant so much and has taught so many of us so much, started the Racial Equity Institute by name in 2015, 5 years ago. And that just a little over a year ago, our superintendent sat where Dr. Payne is right now and showed the very same picture you used and set a challenge for us as commissioners, as board members, and a challenge for her administration by saying there is no reason why, as you say, Dr. Payne, that we should be able to look at a student population and be able to pick before we ask any questions, before we present any information. We should not be able to tell you who will perform the best and who will perform at the lowest points. And that is a problem with the system. That is not the problem with our children.
That's right.
And so to be at this point with the leadership of Andrew and Sean and Dr. Payne, and particularly Superintendent Johnson, I think is a proud moment for us. And I'm just proud that we're taking this leadership step today. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to the team for the just incredible work that's happened over the past year, and certainly in the last several weeks to really get this policy to a place where we could present it to the board for your approval. And we look forward to the passage of it on Thursday evening. Yet another milestone in our journey and in our movement. And thank you to the team for that. Thank you, Dr. Payne, so much for the way you've led.
Thank you.
The last item in new business, item 8.04, we're going to make a real hard pivot. We have a number of innovation agreement amendments that we wanted to bring to the board for approval as we go into the next school year. And so I will turn it over to Jamie Vandewally, our Chief Portfolio Officer, to walk you through those amendments.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Johnson. Good evening, Commissioners. Can you hear me okay?
I might ask you to get a little closer to that mic for our commissioners on the phone.
Every time you all have to ask me on these mics, so happy to try. So coming to you this evening with 5 total amendments that are in 3 categories. We just need to do a little bit of cleanup to some innovation agreements before the start of the next school year. So the first will be a category around pre-opening funds for our new innovation restarts. We have a quick update to the Manual High School agreement, and then also an update to KIPP Legacy High School. So as you remember, at the March 19th board meeting, we did bring 3 agreements to restart schools: Phelan Leadership Academy at Lewis B. Russell School 48, the Pass School at Stephen Foster School 67, and then Emma Donnan Elementary and Middle School that will be with our partners at Adelante. When we talk about the pre-opening funds, these are funds that are meant to support schools during the startup phase before state funding starts. So IPS gets a large sum of funds from the State Department of Education around the 15th of every month. And then we distribute those funds to our Innovation Network schools, who use those to pay their payroll or pay for supplies. And then we also use those ourselves to pay our own employees. In the case of an innovation school restart coming into next year, they won't have received those funds until the 15th of July. And so we oftentimes have provided a little funding up front in order for them to help do things like meet that first payroll, or perhaps purchase supplies for their students before they arrive. It's been a part of innovation agreements in some form or fashion since 2015. And since the last couple of years, I think maybe starting in 2016, we wrote in language where that amount will be repaid to the district in full by the end of the first year of operation. And usually, as I've mentioned, they use it to do things like pay their first payroll or supplies for the beginning of the school year. So the headline here for these 3 agreements is we just need to add a quick amendment to add language that indicates IPS intent to pass through pre-opening funds that will be recouped by the end of the first year of operation for those 3 schools. Frankly, it was just omitted during the drafting phase in March. It was an accident. So the language that we're adding in mirrors is what we've seen in other recent innovation agreements. Related to the manual agreement, just a little jog of the memory here. Way back in January of 2020, we entered into 2 separate innovation agreements with Crystal House Academies. One was for Manual High School, which will remain in the IPS LEA, and that's a teach out is what we called it. So they'll be doing grades 10, 11, and 12 there with us next year. And the other was for a charter partner that would be in our facility. That was Crystal House South. Both of those partnerships are slated to begin in the 2020-2021 school year, so starting next month. As we got into the implementation phase for the manual agreement, we just recognized some places where we were either duplicating language around who paid for special ed service versus who provided the service. It wasn't clear enough to operationalize, and so we just went back with that Crystal House team and clarified a few things. So IPS will remain the LEA, that doesn't change. And then we just go on to articulate some certain supports that IPS will provide to the Crystal House team, particularly during the first quarter, to make sure that all of their special ed programming is up and running, since we're the LEA and ultimately we own responsibility for that. And also it locks in their right to refer students to our special education intensive intervention program. So that's a program that may be a low incident, high need student. So if a student comes into Manual or is already there, they now have the ability to go through the process so that that child could be placed, for example, in a special program at Arsenal Tech, where we may house one. We also wrote in where IPS can place at the life skills class that's at Manual. So Manual has a rather robust life skills class. I believe it's between 15 and 20 students who are there. Under CSUSA's management, IPS couldn't place there. So if there's a high school student on the south side who is in need of those services, we didn't have access, and now we do. And then another thing we wrote in is a $200 per pupil holdback that IPS will retain to offset our cost of the additional placements in one of those intensive intervention programs of ours that a Manual student now has access to, just to offset our cost. So those were the easy ones. The KIPP Legacy one is a little bit more difficult to explain, so we'll walk through it and then just make sure we have time for questions. So you all recall that we entered into partnership with KIPP Legacy High for the 2019 school year. We've just finished our first year with them. They were a new school, new charter partner. We wrote into that agreement that KIPP Legacy High School would receive a per student funding amount that is what they would get if they weren't a part of the IPS family. So it would be based on what the state recognizes the complexity and the need of those particular students. IDE only calculates that once a year in October. So at the start of this agreement with KIPP Legacy High in the fall of 2019, we agreed to pay them at the rate that we were paying KIPP Middle School, KIPP College Prep Middle School, which is also at a higher complexity rate because 90% of the 8th graders from KIPP Middle matriculated to KIPP Legacy High. So essentially the same students. So we assumed that those students then would have the same level of need as a 9th grader as they did as 8th grader. As we got into just digging in the data over the course of the winter, Weston and his team noticed, and the KIPP Legacy team also recognized that somewhere along the way, the number that the state reflects for the level of need for the KIPP Legacy students is far below what we would know to be the reality, given that those students are 90% of the kids who came from KIPP College Prep Middle as 8th graders. If we were to adhere to the innovation contract as it's written, which says they get the amount of dollars that they would get based on that number that the state holds, they would actually receive far, far below what they deserve and what they need to meet their student need. So that was kind of where we are. The soonest we could rectify that number by making sure the state has data that we believe to be accurate would be for the 2021-2022 school year, because they only actually update it on a 2-year cycle. So in order to try to fund KIPP closer to the amount that they actually need to meet the needs of their students based on the complexity and the needs that they've demonstrated, and to do so in a way that's sustainable for IPS and we feel is equitable, we're proposing an agreement to that amendment that really splits it into 2 phases in terms of how we fund it. So first, we would say that for the first 2 years of the agreement, so looking back to last fiscal year as well as this one we're about to enter, we would give KIPP the IPS average per pupil of state funding for the KIPP Legacy High School students. That is a little bit lower than what they would get on their own, but it is exactly what we get for those students. So it means that we are not losing any money by entering into this arrangement, but rather providing them more than what they would get if we gave them what the state has on record for their level of need. Then for the last 3 years of the agreement, it's a 5-year agreement, just like they all are now, we wrote that KIPP Legacy High School would get what they would get on their own. So that's the language that we had put into the agreement in the first place. We are comfortable, and the KIPP team is comfortable proposing we do that for the last 3 years of the agreement, because we feel relatively confident and optimistic that we can rectify the data with the state such that they will then begin to receive the per pupil funding amount that matches the complexity and the need of their students. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Commissioner Arnold?
So by the 3rd year, this 5-year contract, so by the 3rd year, it will be corrected through the DOE for the right percentage of students in need.
Yes, ma'am.
That's why that goes up.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And just to reiterate, it's essentially this fix is revenue neutral to IPS.
Correct.
Commissioner Collins, do you have a question?
Yes, just for clarification, Jamie, so the state understands that they made a mistake and they're going to correct that, or just things will shake out because of the complexity will be seen as obvious in the next 2 years?
The state is well aware that we believe, and the KIP team believes, that there was some mismatch between how they pulled the data and what their data source said versus the reality of the students that are there. They've committed to continuing to look into it with us and with the KIP team, leading up to October of next year. And by that time, we will have it all lined out and fixed.
So that explains why you feel confident and optimistic that
We've had
things-
several hours of problem-solving phone calls
Okay.
with them, yes.
Thank you.
Jamie has a future as a diplomat, I think, is what we've learned. I might ask for purposes for any, by the way, I'm sorry, any questions from any of the commissioners on the phone?
Okay, of course, this is Commissioner Moore. Quick question, did I understand that IPS, it will be a neutral transaction? Is that correct, that IPS would not lose any additional funds that we had not intended to apply towards other schools?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, I think, probably for Mr. Mulholland. As we consider these on Thursday night, will we break them into 3 groups or individual? We have to take votes on, I see 6.
I mean, if there's unanimous support for all of the agreements, we could take it as a single vote. There's no reason we couldn't do it as a single vote, but it'll be
For
at the
consideration of the
discretion.
board between now and Thursday, we may want to consider that. Any further questions?
This is Commissioner Gore. I didn't understand what Mr. Mulholland said.
I asked a question, Commissioner Gore, of whether there are 6 technical amendments here. If it is the will of the board, we could take one motion for all 6 of those amendments. We can take that into consideration for Thursday night.
Okay. I would like to see them broke up myself.
Okay. Any other questions?
Great, thank you. That concludes all items of new business.
Moving to closing comments. Would any commissioner like to offer closing comments this evening? You all look stylish in your masks. Hearing none.
So, of course, I'm going to say, I miss you guys. I'm sorry that I couldn't come. I had an emergency that occurred in my home, but it looks like you guys are handling business, and I'm always proud of each and every one of you.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore.
Thank
And
you.
I will remind anybody watching this evening that Commissioners Moore and Gore, and I don't know if Commissioner Slack is or is not on the phone, whoever is participating electronically next week will also still be operating under the executive order of the governor through July 1st, and will have full voting rights electronically for that. And with that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent for any closing comments.
I have no comments this evening.
Very good. With that, we stand adjourned. Having completed our review of the agenda, our next meeting will be our action session on Thursday in this room beginning at 6 p.m. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.